right, let's look at some Rob Burbea today.
Yeah.
You sent over all these talks,
Yeah.
and I have a feeling we're going to go pretty deep on some Buddhist concepts.
Yeah, I think you're right.
What is it about Burbea that you find so fascinating?
Well, what fascinates me about Burbea is how he can blend these different traditions like Theravada and Mahayana
Oh, yeah.
and Tantra, and then he'll weave in Western psychology.
Right.
And he makes it accessible for modern practitioners.
It's that blend that makes it so compelling for me.
Yeah.
He's not afraid to talk about the big questions,
Yeah.
like awakening and the self and even death.
Right.
But he does it in a way that's both interesting to think about and also really relevant to our meditation practice.
He really does.
Yeah.
Like when he talks about the depth and breadth of practice,
Yeah.
he knows that Buddhist teachings are vast.
Right.
But he also wants us to find what really resonates with us as individuals.
Right. It's not this one-size-fits-all approach.
Right.
Remember that analogy he uses about the 300 spear stabs every day for 100 years in exchange for full awakening?
Oh, yeah.
Talk about dedication.
It's a powerful image.
Yeah.
And it shows this thing. He always says that full awakening in the Theravada tradition, that's a long and hard path,
Yeah.
It could even take many lifetimes of really dedicated practice.
Wow.
But he also makes it clear that there are different levels of awakening.
Right.
Stream entry.
Yeah.
The first stage where you can't turn back from enlightenment.
Okay, so for those who might not know about stream entry, could you explain what that means?
Sure.
Yeah.
So in the Theravada tradition, stream entry is when you have this direct insight into the three marks of existence, which are impermanent suffering or unsatisfactoriness.
Dukkha.
Right. Dukkha and non-self. Anatta.
Yeah.
And this insight is it's so deep, it totally changes how you see reality.
Wow.
And it puts you on this path towards being totally liberated.
And Burbea pulls from Mahayana teachings, too.
He does.
He says that awakening isn't about getting rid of the self.
Right.
It's about understanding that it's constructed.
Yeah, like that analogy he gives about the blind man who thinks a dirty rag is a white cloth.
Exactly.
It shows our basic ignorance about the nature of the self.
We're clinging to this idea that the self is solid and independent.
Yeah.
But when you really look at it, it's just these changing processes.
Right, processes that are both physical and mental.
And that understanding takes away the fear of death, right?
Exactly.
It's not the end of some solid self that we're scared of,
Right.
but the dissolving of a process.
He is pulling from the Madhyamaka school of Mahayana Buddhism here,
Yeah.
which looks at this idea of emptiness or shunyata.
Interesting.
And that doesn't mean that things don't exist,
Right.
but that they don't exist independently.
Okay.
They only exist in relation to other things. So the self, when you see it through emptiness,
Yeah.
it's something that came about dependently.
Right.
So its passing isn't a tragedy. It's just a change in the flow of experience.
So it's more than just an intellectual idea.
It is.
This is about a real change
Yeah.
in how we experience the self.
Right.
I imagine that this affects our meditation in a big way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This idea that the self is constructed can help us in our vipassana practice or insight meditation.
Right.
When we watch our physical feelings, our thoughts, and our emotions, we can see how impermanent, unsatisfactory, and how lacking in solidity the self is.
And he makes it clear that being awakened doesn't mean you're always in bliss.
Right.
He brings in his understanding of Western psychology here,
He does.
especially Stanislav Grof and his work on perinatal matrices.
Yeah.
These imprints from when we were born that shape how we develop psychologically.
Right.
Burbea suggests that even when we are awakened, these patterns can still come up
They can.
and affect how we experience things.
Yeah.
So it challenges this idea that enlightenment is just one state that never changes.
Exactly.
It's more about being free in how we relate to different states of mind.
Yeah.
He often talks about the difference between states of awakening and stages of awakening.
Okay.
States like those we experience in deep meditation can come and go,
Right.
but stages like stream entry show a fundamental shift in our understanding
Right.
that can't be reversed.
So it's not about holding on to blissful state.
Yeah.
About developing an awareness that can face anything with equanimity.
Exactly.
That's where his teachings on cultivating the Brahma Viharas come in.
They do.
Loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity.
Yes.
He says that these qualities aren't about becoming other-centered,
Right.
but about realizing how interconnected everything is.
And how everything kind of penetrates each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that leads us to his thoughts on possessions.
Yes.
He suggests we should look at the things we own
Yeah.
and realize that deep down, they aren't really ours.
It's a practice that comes from the teaching of anatta or non-self.
Okay.
It's not about saying we don't own things in a practical sense.
Right.
It's about seeing the deeper truth.
That nothing is really separate or independent.
This makes me rethink my relationship with my meditation cushion.
Maybe it does.
It might even lead us to Burbea's teachings on renunciation,
Yes.
which, he says is not about self-denial, but a way to find more space and freedom.
Absolutely.
This is a good transition to his thoughts on death.
It is.
He always told us to think about death.
Right.
Not in a morbid way,
No.
but to help us see what really matters in life.
Yes.
Remember that story about his friend who found a snake skull?
I do.
And felt this overwhelming joy when they saw it?
Yes, I remember that.
What a reaction.
It is.
It reminds us that facing death and even welcoming it can be really freeing.
He's drawing on the traditional Buddhist practice of Maranasati here,
Right, yeah.
or mindfulness of death.
Right.
By thinking about our own death, we can develop a sense of urgency and clarity about what's really important in life.
Okay.
It helps us figure out what makes dying easier or harder. Is it about holding on or letting go, grasping or giving?
Those are some deep questions to think about.
Yeah, they are. But Burbea, he could always make these serious topics a little lighter.
Oh, yeah.
Remember that story about the monk who measured his enlightenment
Yeah.
by counting how many toilet paper rolls he used during late-night meditation?
That always makes me laugh. It's such a smart way to show how we can get attached to spiritual experiences.
Exactly. Even the ones that seem really profound.
Yeah.
And it points to something important in Burbea's teachings.
What's that?
His understanding of how desire plays a role on the path.
He doesn't say we should completely suppress desire, does he?
No, not at all. He actually says that desire can bring energy and drive to our practice,
Okay.
but he also warns us about the dangers of desire.
Right. So how do we find that balance?
Yeah, how do we use the power of desire without becoming a slave to it?
Right. How do we develop that kind of discernment in our practice?
Well, Burbea looks to the Buddhist teachings on the four right efforts.
Okay, what are those?
So there's the effort to stop unwholesome states from coming up.
The effort to let go of unwholesome states that are already there.
Right.
The effort to cultivate wholesome states.
Okay.
And the effort to maintain the wholesome states that we've already cultivated.
Wow, that's a lot to think about.
It is.
Could you break down each of those efforts?
Yeah.
And how they relate to dealing with desire?
Sure. So the first effort, preventing unwholesome states from arising,
Right.
it's about developing mindfulness and wise attention.
Okay.
We start to see what triggers craving, aversion, and clinging.
Yeah.
And we can avoid those triggers, or at least be more aware of them.
So we're being proactive in our practice.
Exactly.
We're noticing the patterns that lead to suffering before they really take hold.
Right. The second effort, abandoning unwholesome states that are already there.
Yeah.
It's about realizing when we've fallen into those patterns of craving or aversion,
Okay.
and then using skillful means to let them go.
So what would that look like?
It could be things like mindfulness of breathing,
Okay.
loving kindness meditation.
Or even just recognizing that these states are impermanent.
So it's not about blaming ourselves when we get caught up in those states.
No.
It's about developing the tools to step back from them skillfully.
Exactly. Now, the third effort, cultivating wholesome states,
Yeah.
it's about actively developing qualities like generosity, compassion, loving kindness, and wisdom.
Okay.
These qualities naturally work against greed, hatred, and delusion.
So it's not just about getting rid of the bad stuff.
No.
It's about filling our minds with good and helpful qualities.
Precisely. And the fourth effort, maintaining wholesome states that are already there,
Right.
it's about recognizing and appreciating those qualities when they're present
Okay.
and creating the right conditions for them to keep growing.
So how do we do that?
We might surround ourselves with good friends and teachers,
Right.
engage in inspiring practices,
Yeah.
and create an environment that supports our practice.
So it's about looking at the whole picture.
It is.
It's about cultivating both inner and outer conditions that help us move toward liberation.
Exactly. And when we apply these four right efforts to desire,
Yeah.
it can help us find that balance between aspiration and contentment,
Okay.
between striving and acceptance.
That makes sense. But how does all this relate to dispassion,
Yeah.
which is something Burbea talks about a lot?
Right.
It seems like it contradicts the idea of using the energy of desire.
It's a good question. And this is where Burbea's integration of the tantric view is really helpful.
How so?
Well, in Tantra, desire isn't seen as something to get rid of.
Okay.
It's seen as a powerful energy that can be transformed and used for spiritual awakening.
So how does that work practically?
It's about cultivating a different relationship with desire,
Okay.
a kind of intimacy with it.
Hmm.
Instead of pushing it away or giving into it, we learn to observe it, to
Right.
understand its nature,
Okay.
to see how it creates both pleasure and pain.
I'm starting to see how this connects to dispassion.
Yeah.
It's not about becoming cold or emotionless.
Right.
It's about having a deeper understanding of desire, seeing that it's impermanent and ultimately doesn't satisfy us.
Exactly. And as we cultivate this understanding, desire's hold on us naturally loosens.
Okay.
We're not as driven by craving and aversion,
Yeah.
and we can experience a deeper, more stable joy
Okay.
that doesn't depend on external things.
That's a profound insight.
Yes.
Instead of fighting with desire, we befriend it,
We do.
understand it, and ultimately turn it into something that supports our awakening.
Exactly. And this is where the stillness we develop in meditation becomes really important.
Okay.
It lets us see those subtle movements of desire,
Yeah.
how it arises, clings, and dissolves.
We see the suffering that's built into craving and aversion,
We do.
and that understanding naturally leads us towards more dispassion. So the stillness of meditation isn't just about calming the mind.
No, it's not.
It's about developing this wisdom that can see through the illusions created by desire.
Exactly. And as we cultivate that wisdom, we begin to see what really matters in life. We
Yeah.
start making choices that align with our deepest values. And we find ourselves drawn to a simpler, more sustainable, and joyful way of being.
It seems like Burbea was challenging us to rethink societal norms about comfort and indulgence.
It was.
He encouraged us to see renunciation not as self-denial, but as a path to greater spaciousness
Right.
and ultimately joy.
He did.
It's not about deprivation, but about reconsidering what truly nourishes us.
You got it. He often talked about how we need to cultivate inner resources and well-being
Okay.
before we can expect ourselves to let go of external attachments.
So it's about building that inner strength
Yes,
so we can handle life's challenges without clinging to external sources of comfort.
that's it. Remember that story about Burbea living upstairs at Gaia House?
Yeah, with that sign on his door,
Right.
I'm homeless. I don't live here. Death is all around.
Such a powerful statement.
It is.
It shows how committed he was to living in line with the truths he'd found through his practice.
Yeah.
He was always reminding himself and everyone else that
Yeah.
everything is impermanent and that we shouldn't cling to external attachments.
Just like a Zen koan,
It is.
a statement designed to wake us up
Yes.
and make us think about what home and belonging really mean.
Yeah.
So it's not about physically getting rid of all our possessions or relationships.
No.
It's about changing how we relate to them,
Yeah.
developing a sense of non-attachment that lets us enjoy them
Right.
without depending on them for our ultimate security.
Exactly. He was pointing to a deeper kind of home,
Yeah.
one that's not tied to a physical place or external things.
So where is this home?
It's about making a home in the Dharma,
Okay.
rooting ourselves in the ethical principles, skillful practices, and wisdom of Buddhist teachings.
That reminds me of the quote from Jesus that he often shared.
Which one?
Foxes have holes and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to rest his head.
Yeah, it's like saying that the search for true security might lead to a feeling of homelessness.
And the other way around.
Exactly. Burbea often said that the path to awakening can sometimes feel like we're taking apart our old ways of seeing and being in the world.
Yeah.
It can feel like being homeless as we let go of the things we used to rely on for comfort.
But as we practice,
Yes.
as we develop inner resources and deepen our understanding,
We do.
we start to discover a new kind of home,
We do.
a sense of belonging that comes from deep within ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like the ground shifts beneath us,
Mhm.
and we find ourselves on something much more stable,
Yeah.
even if it feels strange at first.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
And it's this inner stability, this home inside ourselves,
Right.
that Burbea saw as the basis for true joy and freedom.
He didn't make it sound easy, though.
Oh, no.
He was honest about the challenges and the paradoxes of the path.
Right. He even joked about enlightenment at Bloomingdale's,
Oh, yeah.
making fun of this idea of a comfortable spirituality that
Yeah.
doesn't lead to real transformation.
He encouraged us to be skeptical of anyone who promised easy enlightenment
He did.
or a path without any challenges.
Yeah, he saw discomfort and uncertainty as part of the process,
Right.
necessary for real growth.
He often compared the spiritual journey to the creative process.
He did.
Both involve stepping into the unknown,
Right.
embracing uncertainty,
Mhm.
and letting ourselves be shaped by what comes up.
Just like an artist has to wrestle with their materials,
Yeah.
experiment, and take risks,
Right.
a spiritual practitioner needs to confront their limitations,
Yeah.
challenge their habits,
Right.
and be open to being transformed by the practice.
It's about accepting the messiness of it all,
Is.
not getting hung up on some perfect outcome,
No.
but finding the beauty and wisdom in every step.
Exactly. And that's where Burbea's emphasis on developing a discerning eye in meditation comes in.
Okay.
It's not just passively watching our experience,
Right.
but actively investigating it,
Okay.
asking questions, challenging our assumptions.
And that discerning eye isn't limited to meditation.
No.
Yeah. We can bring that same awareness and inquiry into everything we do.
Exactly. It's about noticing how we relate to our work, our relationships, our possessions, even our bodies. It's
Yeah.
about seeing how we create suffering
Right.
through clinging and aversion,
Okay.
and finding skillful ways to deal with those patterns with more wisdom and compassion.
And sometimes being skillful means letting go.
It does.
Letting go of things that don't serve us,
Yeah.
even if those things bring us pleasure or comfort.
Burbea saw renunciation not as denying ourselves,
Okay.
but as a path to greater freedom and joy.
He saw true happiness not in accumulating things,
Yeah.
but in cultivating inner qualities like
Mhm.
wisdom, compassion, and generosity.
Yeah.
And that means we have to be willing to let go of things, even things we're attached to or identify with.
We do.
It's a constant process
It is.
of refining our understanding of what truly nourishes us
Right.
and what keeps us trapped in cycles of craving and dissatisfaction.
He often spoke about the lightness and spaciousness.
Yeah.
That comes when we loosen our grip on those attachments.
Right.
The sense of peace and contentment
Okay.
that comes from recognizing the emptiness of our desires.
He also talked a lot about passion,
He did.
not the kind fueled by craving or attachment,
Right.
but a passion rooted in our deepest values and aspirations.
Yes.
A passion that fuels our commitment to the path.
He recognized that we need a certain fire
Yeah.
to keep us going on the path.
To keep us moving forward when things get tough.
And that fire, that passion,
Yeah.
comes from connecting with our deepest motivations.
Okay.
The reasons why we practice the vision of awakening that inspires us.
It's like tapping into this wellspring of energy within us.
Yes.
The energy that wants to move us toward wholeness, toward liberation, toward fulfilling our true potential.
Exactly. And that energy, when we use it skillfully, can be a powerful force for transformation
It can.
for ourselves and for the world around us.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today,
We have.
exploring some of the core ideas in Rob Burbea's teachings.
It's been great to revisit his insights with you.
It has.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Burbea's world, maybe we could leave our listeners with this question.
Okay.
How can you bring some of that back to front thinking that Burbea talked about into your life?
Right.
What small experiment can you try this week
Yeah.
to shake things up a bit? Challenge your habits and find a deeper sense of freedom and joy in your practice.
That's a good one.